So today's forum is, as I said, all about cost of living, and we've got some great speakers with us today, which I'll go through shortly, but I just wanted to show you what the agenda is, and I'll stop sharing my screen now. So yeah, this is our fourth forum of the year. We try to ensure that our forums are always informed by the emerging needs and the sector-wide concerns of the VCS. So our first forum this year focused on vaccine hesitancy and misinformation, which precipitated the launch of a new innovative funding program, which focused on grassroots and community-led initiatives to tackle both vaccine hesitancy and wider health and well-being needs that were exacerbated by the pandemic. And that included access to general practice and NHS services and support, interrupted care and treatment for a range of long-term conditions such as diabetes and high blood pressure and heart-related conditions. It also included early identification of new health conditions and, as we're all aware, deteriorating mental health illness conditions like depression, anxiety, severe mental illness and social isolation. So we're really pleased to announce that we'll be launching a fresh round of this funding program in the new year. Ricky is going to be our funding officer or grant program manager, and we'll talk a bit about that more at the end of this forum. So that's an incentive to stick around. The last two forums that we had focused on integrated care system and how the VCSE was contributing to the shaping of the new health system. And that included workshops on how we design and deliver innovative strengths-based models of care in Camden. But we know how incredibly important today's topic is for the whole sector, and so we're really pleased to be able to host it. If you're like me, you've probably been to a number of these conversations, so we hope we're not repeating anything that you haven't heard already, but as I said, we know that it's a priority for so many of you. We are deeply concerned for the continued resilience of our sector, and we know that the support that's been announced is short-term for household and businesses and the charity sector, and we know that it's nowhere near the level of support that's required. We know that for many households, this will not abate the financial strain they're facing, nor will it alleviate the continued pressure on our already stretched frontline services. And so for that reason, in October, we launched this members survey to better understand how the crisis is impacting the VCS and how community organisations are responding and what further support the sector needs to tackle this new challenge. So we're really pleased to share the results of the survey with you today. And Alex from VAC will be taking us through those survey results. We're also going to hear from, I hope, Farrah, if she's not here already, Farrah, who is from LifeAfterHummus Community Benefit Society, and she's going to be talking to us about the challenges and concerns that her organisation is facing, and which I think is probably shared across the sector. We're going to hear from Sarah Sedley from the council, who is the Tackling Poverty Programme Manager, and she's going to be talking to us about the council's response for residents. We've got, really pleased to say, we've got Hannah Norgate from LondonPlus, and she's their Networks Manager, and she's going to be talking to us about CVS Cost of Living Task and Finish Group. Always get those two things mixed up. And then we've got John Muir from Camden Council, who's the Head of Community Partnership, and he's going to be talking to us about the cost of living community response. And it's also really important that John is here to listen to the insights as the council prepares for the development of a proposal for the Resilience Fund, which you might have remembered from last year. So just to finish off, we know that these are challenging times for everybody. We've only just begun as a sector to recover from the impact of the pandemic, and this crisis is likely to last even longer. But we know that Camden VCS has consistently demonstrated its ability to respond quickly and efficiently. We know that we have the experience, the community reach, the ingenuity, and the resolve to tackle this latest crisis and ensure that meaningful support reaches those in need. So as key infrastructure partners, we want to work with the council to ensure that the perspective of the VCS informs the council's support for the sector. So it's really, as I said, it's really great to have council officers here with us today. So as well as identifying gaps in support and provision and identifying solutions, we are also calling for cross-sector unity and resistance to the much anticipated reduction in public spending. And for that reason, we're actively engaging with the council on how we approach this. So I guess a bit of a call for support, really. If you would like to support our actions on this, please do let us know. And lastly, we want this forum to be an opportunity for discussion, so we try to structure the agenda to accommodate that. There will be opportunity to ask questions after each presentation, and we've also got a section at the end which is dedicated for Q&A. So without further delay, because we've got a really tight agenda, I'm going to ask Alex from VAC to take us through the survey results. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Keith. Can everybody hear me? First of all, yeah, okay. Let me get the slides up then, and hopefully this all works okay. Right. Okay. Can you just see the slides there? I've got some notes as well. Yeah, all looks good. Okay. So yeah, first of all, Keith's already introduced the purpose of the survey, really, but what we just wanted to understand a little bit more about was what organisations are seeing on the ground, and what does that mean for how their services need to change, or how they're going to manage that demand, and then also thinking about the impact on the organisation itself and the staff, and thinking about what sort of further support is needed, both for the community and the organisation to be able to navigate their way through the challenge. We've heard from 50 of our members, approximately 50 members and service users. The figures in the survey talk to there's 35 responses that came in directly from the survey, but we're also building in anecdotal evidence from some of our other areas of work. So through social prescribing, referrals, where we're hearing from residents looking for support, as well as sort of attending other events and speaking with organisations. So the presentation is sort of based on those responses, and it's a broad response from across the borough. It covers nearly every ward and from a range of organisations from small to large as well. So the first thing that we were asking about was the impact of the crisis on the organisation's ability to actually deliver the services, and whether or not there was an increased demand for those services at this point in time, or whether that was an actual increase or something that was anticipated further down the line. So you can see here that the majority of organisations are already reporting an increase in demand, and within the next bracket, then you've got an anticipated increase happening already. And if we sort of look at the averages across that, then we're looking at around about 45% across a current increase in demand, and a bit lower for anticipated. But in reality, some of the responses that came back were as high as 100% increase in demand, or the sort of top end between 75 to 100%. So the next question was really asking organisations about how they were placed to manage that demand with their current level of resources. And you can see from the chart there that there's a sort of balance really between organisations that feel that yes, they can manage, they've got sufficient funds and staff to cover that demand, and in the sort of light purple colour, the ones that are actually struggling, that they can't manage that demand, they need to take on staff but don't have any resources to do that. And one of the comments that we heard back from one of our members was that people are living in extreme poverty. They can't turn the lights on in order to save energy. They're using street lights. Recently, we've issued 100 food bank vouchers for people who are facing starvation. The demand is continuing, but we have no resources. So you can see for organisations like that, that there's a big concern around future support. So the next question was really talking about the impact on the ability to deliver services. So there was lots of comments from organisations around this, but if we sort of group that into key themes, then it sort of comes down to a marked increase in demand for services, but many service users are struggling. There are concerns around how current staff and volunteers will manage current or new services developed to help respond to the crisis. And there was also a sense of, I guess, the sort of knock-on impact of when you're dealing with people that have got, difficult or presenting difficult stories to you, that the knock-on effect on staff of having to, sort of manage and cope with that was also impacting upon their own mental health and sort of sense of resilience as well. On top of that, there was a sense of it becoming increasingly hard to retain and sustain the workforce, as well as recruiting new staff and employees to help manage that demand. And several organisations were talking about having to really reshape the way that they were delivering those services, to cut back on things that are now, I guess, considered less critical than before, although they were still part of their essential services, but having to really sort of prioritise what they can do with the staff and resources that they've got. And on top of that, of course, the rising costs for running the organisation, rent and so on, is stretching those budgets even further. And organisations that sort of depend on income from chargeable services, so room hire, membership, funding, or donations rather, as well, there's concerns around that sort of drop in income and what that means in terms of being able to continue their current service delivery. I just wanted to pull out a couple of comments that we'd got from the survey that sort of illustrates some of those points. So, we heard from one organisation that said that they'd like to support the community by providing a warm hub, but the church heating costs and food costs are going to make that really difficult. And then from another organisation, the cost of living crisis is causing more of our supporters to no longer have the funds to pay for membership. So reduction in income from which we usually pay for services to target beneficiaries is a real concern. So the next slide was really looking at what sort of issues had been reported by service users in the last 6 months. And you can see from there that amongst the highest issues there is struggling to pay bills, which doesn't really come as any surprise. And of course, that's coupled with rising mental health and physical health issues, as people are sort of facing anxiety around those financial commitments. Low household income, mortgage anxiety, fuel and food poverty are all highly scoring there as well. And some of the other issues in that category, other category, include things like domestic violence increasing, as well as the digital divide, making it harder to find work or having somebody to talk to. So that sort of sense of isolation and loneliness, compounding those anxieties and mental health issues as well. And a comment that we got from an organisation working with young people is around how their mental health is being adversely affected. They're having to choose to drop out of education or defer. They're having to make difficult choices, and it's leading to social isolation, and in some instances affecting their relationship with family and friends. So that the next question was really focused around how this is sort of different or changing since the pandemic. And so there was a sense of increased anxiety, stress, and mental health as service users are grappling with a multitude of different issues and concerns. People from all backgrounds are struggling with cost of living and food insecurity. It's not just necessarily people from low-income households. Increasingly, service users are struggling to find support from statutory services and are turning to the voluntary sector more for support. There's a sense of reporting of knocking on closed doors to services, and obviously, you know, that's increasing that sense of anxiety as well. There's concerns around sort of food bank usage as well. So a lot of working households not having enough to live on, and people struggling with debt and increases in bills, kind of leading to a different demographic of people who are accessing food banks or food support in general. And also the number of women and young people appears to be on the, or approaching for help appears to be on the increase as well. And as we talked about there with, you know, education and that sort of sense of social isolation, people having to make choices about where they, you know, where they spend their money and the impact that that has on their ability to feel connected in their community. And so there's I guess these comments have come from the survey response, but also just to sort of dovetail that with the community links social prescribing service. So this is where VAC is hearing directly from residents about the challenges that they're facing and what support they're looking for. So a narrative of, or a summary of that was that clients are from a vulnerable population, but the cost of living crisis has put additional stress on the ability to purchase food, heat, and attend services. And this has had a knock-on impact on both mental and physical health. We're hearing from more residents who are more concerned about finances, fuel bills, rent, food prices, even running vital medical equipment. And it's similar to the pandemic response in a way where individuals, middle earners and two income households that haven't necessarily needed social prescribing support before are now turning to the voluntary sector for assistance. And in the worst cases, some people are even considering moving out of the borough or London altogether to try and find a more affordable way through the crisis. There was also a sense that although there are schemes and support out there, that residents aren't always aware of what's available and what resources there actually are to help them get through the crisis. There's a lot of information, so feeling overwhelmed and confused with what's being put out by the council, by government more broadly. Energy companies have all got different different schemes and so on, and even the media suggesting that there needs to be a bit more clarity and more focused support for connecting residents up to the available support in the borough. And this was highlighted in one of the women's group sessions that a VAC colleague recently attended, where they were talking about the Camden Hardship Fund. But in actual fact, although there had been a fair amount of promotion around that, attendees were oblivious of the scheme. And once it had been mentioned within that session, then they'd all been requested to be referred for the grant. So yeah, there's a sense that I guess with the long winter coming, the festive period, on top of that, many households are finding it a challenge, and some of them are having to choose between heating or eating. And as we've said already, this will no doubt add to those who are already struggling with existing conditions, mental health, debt or other long-term conditions, or could represent a risk of starting those sorts of things, those sorts of problems for people that haven't previously been impacted so badly by the pandemic. The next slide talked about next question, sorry, talked about the services that were being set up specifically to help manage the crisis. So this is sort of on top of existing services. And you can see there that by far the top sort of service is around support to do with mental health, and also collecting people into get access to benefits or help with finding a job, or issues around money generally, as well as trying to set up a warm hub to support those residents during the colder months. The next question was about what organisations are actually doing, and what they're planning to sort of help mitigate the impact of the crisis. And it probably doesn't come as any big surprise to hear that organisations are talking about money, and so applying for or raising more funding so that they can continue to provide the current services or the additional service that we've talked about. And of course, that can't happen without the staff or volunteers to support that, and also to sort of cover that deficit around running costs as well. Many of them are looking to increase capacity to accommodate growing needs, and also to provide support around food, whether that's sort of cooked hot meals or providing support in the form of vouchers or food bank, extending food bank services. For those that do charge, they're talking about trying to keep the service costs free or minimal, or sort of absorbing some of the hit of that, so that service users can continue to access those services with limited finances themselves. And then a sense of providing more information, more clarity and advice for residents, and setting up these warm hubs and social opportunities to help overcome that sense of social isolation. And so, yeah, I mean, this sort of dovetails with what's being planned, really. But so more financial support, more information and resources, more staff, volunteers, technical IT support to help digitize services, as well as sort of that internal facing, support for staff who are having to cope with the increase in demand, and then thinking about how to use space more effectively. And of course, we've got the VAC Google grant scheme running at the moment, which organisations might be able to leverage to help extend those activities. So that part of the presentation was really about the impact on services. This next bit is really looking more internally at the organisation itself, to see what they're concerned about, and how they're sort of planning to deal with that at the organisation. So you can see here from the graph that overwhelmingly the highest concern really is around staff costs. So obviously that's sort of salaries and associated costs of that. Some organisations are talking about a cost of living payment for the workforce, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in a second. But I guess second and third to that was sort of building costs, so rising rents and insurance costs, coupled with the increase in utility costs of sort of gas, electricity and water, compounding the financial insecurity for the organisation. And then I guess sort of coupled with the changes in the public's giving behaviour. So you've probably heard in the papers that people are talking about, you know, where they are giving donations, that it's one of the first things that people are starting to think about cutting, as they're, you know, obviously ring fencing their own security and have to think about that rather than supporting other organisations. So again, it sort of seems to be hitting from all angles in many cases. And the next thing we asked about was, well, okay, these are the concerns. What are you doing to try and address that at the sort of board and managerial level? And so organisations were talking about revising their funding and income generation strategy. So sort of looking to diversify funding, speak to existing funders, approach new funders to help manage the deficit that they've got. They're talking about extra pay rises or cost of living payments to support a stretched workforce, trying to think about how buildings, spaces and utilities are used appropriately to ensure that they're bringing in as much money as they can from that, and sort of balancing that against obviously the cost of charging for it. And then sort of looking a bit further ahead to see whether or not their business plans or strategic kind of development needs to shift a little bit to prioritise or develop new services. And there's also a sense of wanting to kind of do more together, I think, within the sector. So joining up, much within the pandemic, where we saw lots of organisations kind of working together to address those challenges. So a recognition that, you know, there's limited funds, limited money, limited resources, and thinking how organisations can sort of work more effectively in networking and partnership to help those funds go further. And work strategically with funders and council and the council to deliver on that. So yeah, we were asking then just to get a sense of the kind of financial position really within the organisation, how organisations were sort of forecasting their budget for the end of the year. So the majority were saying that they have a deficit, but they've got reserves to cover that shortfall. But sort of closely behind that, you can see that there's a large number of organisations that have a deficit and no reserves to cover the shortfall. And it sort of links into this next question here, which is around financial security and how organisations were sort of feeling beyond March 2023. And the optimistic is sort of that the current funding pipeline will sustain services until March 2023, and they're feeling fairly confident that they'll be able to secure additional funding beyond that. But just behind that, you can see there's a large number of organisations that are feeling quite uneasy, and that broadly meant that their funding pipeline will sustain the services until March 2023, but beyond that they haven't necessarily got confirmed funding, and they're not quite sure what that position looks like going forward into the next financial year. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got the ones that are feeling a bit more secure, where they've got funding, they've already got the resources in place for all of their services beyond March 23. And then the ones that at the opposite to that, really, that breaking point, that they haven't got any additional resources and support, and they need to reduce their services or close by March 2023. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. So yeah, this next question was sort of thinking about how the organisation can support its workforce, who of course themselves are having to grapple with the cost of living crisis outside of work, and obviously more people working from home, energy costs and heating homes is all compounding that for the staff as well. The majority of organisations were talking about giving a pay rise as expected. There's different pay scales and pay levels across the voluntary sector, so there'll be some variation in what that actually means across different organisations. Some organisations are talking about a one-off bonus, or trying to provide, I guess, non-financial packages of support, but more linked around well-being, and ensuring that staff are supported, and that there are schemes that staff can use if they're feeling anxious or need to talk to people about the problems that they're facing. And then there was a question around the support needed from organisations, what further support was needed. And it sort of broadly come down to more money, either continuation of existing grants or new grants, sort of longer term strategy really to help organisations have a bit more security around their future financial position. There was more needed around information and signposting, so that sort of connecting role to link up resources and opportunities across the sector, more shared working opportunities, and networking and partnership working, and then also sort of having a stronger voice across the sector of, our what we're hearing, I guess, why we're all here today, and how we can all join together to sort of advocate for the needs of residents and organisations more effectively. And then there was around support with staff recruitment and retention, and volunteers as well, and a bit more guidance around how to sort of cope with managing office space and premises and rising utility costs and that sort of thing. And so these were some of the ideas that people had come up with around how to address some of these challenges. So sort of touched on the slide before really, so learning from each other, increasing staff training, increasing sort of I guess support to help staff with mental health challenges, more targeted financial support, and again that sort of increasing political pressure and forging stronger connections across the voluntary sector, but also with our statutory partners and other institutions in the borough that are able to help. And one of the comments that we got from this was that we think the voluntary sector is ready and willing to support people in need, but it really does need government council support and intervention. The crisis is unique because not only is it being faced by our beneficiaries, but also all of our staff and trustees who are also concerned about rising costs and fuel bills. I'm very worried about local people, communities, and my team, especially with the cold months setting in, and more support needs to be given to those who are on very low incomes, but fall just outside the benefit threshold. And that was, I think that's come to the end of the slideshow actually there, Keith. So I don't know if there's any, are we taking questions at this point?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex, for taking us through that really comprehensive feedback from the survey results, and thank you for everyone, especially if you're here, who completed our survey. It really helps to inform our decision making, but also being able to share that with statutory partners, and for it to also inform their decision making. I thought it was really that last point about it almost being like a double whammy. So it's the residents or the families that we support are being affected or impacted by this, but also the organisation and the staff within those organisations are being impacted. And this this challenge to be able to support both groups is really different, I think, from the last 2 years, the challenges that we faced in the last 2 years. So yeah, I do want to open the floor and see if there are any questions. I can't see everyone, so if you do have a comment or question, please just speak. Take yourself off mute. Thank you.
Nick Stone here, Autism Hub, waving my hand to attract attention.
Hi, Nick.
Hello, Keith. Thank you. Are you seeing a lot of stresses within families where members of the family are trying to help each other, but are finding anxieties as they try and help members of their family? Obviously, you may find a particular member of the family having particular problems and is not able to access social care, welfare benefits, medical support, and then is asking for other members of the family to help them out, and that's creating its own stresses and dynamics.
Shall I answer that question, Alex?
Yeah.
I think, Nick, it's probably, despite the fact that this is really difficult, challenging times now, I think we're probably right at the beginning of it. So we're not necessarily seeing the kind of things that you're talking about in the survey results, but we know that there is anxiety about that coming forward. So we probably need to do a similar type of survey in maybe 6 months' time to see, what has changed and how much that those concerns have intensified. But yeah, I absolutely anticipate that will be the case. Is that especially staff within the sector will be concerned about, as I said, their own their own challenges and those of the families families and friends that they have, and that will have an impact on their ability to deliver the service. So absolutely, I think that's something that will be coming down the track.
There were a couple of responses, Keith, just on people feeling that I guess a burden really on having to approach their family members, and how that was sort of causing additional stress and sort of starting to change those family sort of relationship dynamics as well. So I think, as you say, it's sort of starting already, but we're definitely going to see more of that as this worsens.
Any other questions?
Trisha, Castlehaven.
Hi, Trisha.
Hi, Keith. How are you? Thanks, Alex, for that very brutal display of what is actually happening out here. As a CEO of a community association, we're noticing a massive change in the people that are accessing our services, particularly our food banks, as mentioned in your report. The fact that we've got families that generally were, living a normal sort of day-to-day life that are now are accessing our food banks, and those particular people are way more emotional, if I can be honest, in tears, floods of tears. Don't want anybody to see them, don't want anybody to know that they're going to a food bank, because they've always coped okay and led sort of a life where they can afford to live. So we're noticing that change. We've also noticed a change in people's mental health as well. We're having more people coming in with not severe mental health issues, but like on the border, where they've just been tipped over the edge, and we're having to refer people more and more to mental health services, which also have humongous waiting lists, and that doesn't help the situation at all, because you're sending somebody off, signposting them to a service that are also struggling because they can't see the amount of people that they've got the demand for. So as a CEO, we've trained our staff in mental health first aid, but we're having to up the ante, making sure that our staff are fully aware of what's going on, and to make sure that they are protected as well, because they are too also on lower wages, working for a small organisation. We've had to increase their salaries this year, and we're lucky to be in that position to be able to do that. But I don't want to lose my staff. So I'll fight tooth and nail to make sure that we can still have our amazing team. It's we're feeling the pinch all over, and it does feel like we've just come out of a pandemic and now we're being battered left, right and centre from all what's, but we will fight to keep our communities as healthy and as engaged as possible, and make sure that most of our services, which they are completely free, because, you know, people won't turn up if there's a cost attached, and we have noticed a change in the amount of people, you know, like if we have a coach trip or something like that, the coach trip numbers are dwindling, because obviously, you know, it's a nice thing to do. It's an added thing in your budget that you would, you know, treat yourself to a day out. But actually people, you know, they're having to really scrimp and scrape and make sure that they can pay their bills and food bills. So anyway, thanks for that, Alex, though. It was quite an eye-opener.
Thank you so much, Tricia. That's really helpful. You know, frontline account of what's happening, and it's a nice segue into the next section. So I'm really pleased to welcome Farrah from LifeAfterHummus, who is going to share with us some of the challenges and concerns her organisation is seeing, and also, you know, which I know is going to be shared across the sector. So Farrah, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, VAC, for organising this meeting and the survey. It's so needed. We're LifeAfterHummus Community Benefit Society. Most of you, I think, know us by now. We run a surplus food bank and a reuse centre in Somerstown, and we have a demographic of roughly 70% BAME. Most of the people who access our centre are Muslim, mostly Somali, mostly Bengali. Somerstown is a multi-deprived area, as most of you know. I want to stick to the brief of today's meeting, which is looking at the quick wins, but also raising concerns that we have. So this is in no specific order. Currently, the council is focusing a lot on warm hubs. There is an issue with this, that warm hubs are not suitable for everyone. And I feel there is a big push by the council to send people to warm hubs, but it's failing to recognize that for a big part of the population, warm hubs will not work. Culturally, it's not how they operate, especially for families. It's not how they operate. They will not take their kids to a warm hub. There needs to be a bit more focus on going into the homes and one-to-one support to tackle electricity bills. This has led us down a road of talking to Camden CAB to find out what would be the cost of having an advisor at our centre 1 day a week. And with 1 day a week face-to-face, they would also need 1 day a week doing administration. So that's 2 days a week. And that cost would be roughly 24,000. So we're going down the route of looking, we've applied for one fund, there's some others to apply for, of looking for one-to-one advisor who could sit with each of our homes and hold their hands and ask them, where are you with your bills? Have you informed people? Have you informed your energy companies that you cannot pay? And this is what we can do. This is how we can help you to inform them, make sure your electricity isn't cut off, and also help them physically apply for funds with the various companies. There are grants out there for energy. Now, at the present, this isn't something that Camden is supporting residents with. You can call through for the grants, but I have been told by people who come to the centre, when they're calling through to that helpline, they're not necessarily getting the targeted support. And I am saying this being mindful that Camden has limited resources. But I am really happy that John Muir's on this call today. It's fantastic that you're attending this meeting today. job hubs, obviously at the moment, trying to get people back into work for those who want to go back into work. And we're seeing a lot of mums for the first time saying, look, I need to go back into work. Now, we don't have this capacity, but from January, we will have Good Work Camden cited in our centre once a fortnight to work one-to-one with families. But there are some examples. We send people through to Camden services. So just recently, I've sent somebody through to update a CV. Their CV has been updated by 5 words. So we've ended up not having that capacity, updating the CV, and the person saying to us, this is much better, I will get a response from this. And this is bearing in mind that, as I said, the people, our demographic means that people don't have laptops, they don't have tech skills. Yes, we have training linked next door to us, we send them there for support, but it's bearing in mind that not everybody's able to change their own CV, but it doesn't mean that they aren't fit to work and will be an asset to whoever employs them. But again, that targeted support is missing there. It's depressing to send somebody for support and for them to come back and say, show you the CV, and you find 5 words have been changed. So again, just there needs to be more targeted support for those most in need. Now, we're dealing with a case at the moment of a person who's been made homeless in the area. Just trying to get that person support has been really difficult. We've ended up taking that person to C4WS, who have been wonderful. But trying to use Camden's commission service, Routes Off the Street, to be told that that person, for them to identify that person as homeless, they can't just take our word for it, that they need to know where that person is sleeping between in the middle of the night until 6 a.m. They need to know where that person is going to be sleeping, and the person explaining that they will not be able to give that information because when they sleep in Euston Station, King's Cross Station, St Pancras Station, they get moved on. So how are they meant to give their location for the next 48 hours? And I just want to highlight, where is this person now seeking refuge is in A&E. This is where people are ending up. But for this particular person in the middle of the night, as long as you're sleeping, sitting, you can stay in A&E, you can't lean. Now, for this person, they have their shoes stolen off their feet in the middle of the night, sleeping in A&E. So we've had to go to C4WS, who have limited resources themselves. I should be able to just use Routes Off the Streets. This is the first person that it's happened for us, they've become homeless. We are at the beginning, and the services need to be ready to support these people before they're on the street. It's something that we have been critical of again and again and again. John, I'm happy you're on this call. There is no real plan from the Food Network. The Food Network that many of us belong in, for those of us who can't attend meetings on Thursdays, for whatever reasons, we don't get minutes following these meetings. There is no concrete plan around how to support the independent food banks in Camden. And if I send an email to the person who runs the Food Network, I often will not get a response. And this, I'm sure others here will say the same. And to get out of the blue emails and last minute requests for surveys is not good enough. Camden needs to give that team a dedicated administrator. They need a dedicated person to network with us. Volunteer time. All of us know that our volunteers are at breaking point. We cannot do what we do without our volunteers. In perspective, we're very small compared to some of the services here. We are a staff of 2.5 members of staff supported by 50 local volunteers. Without our volunteers, we wouldn't be where we are today. But our volunteers, they've given so much in the pandemic, and now they're answering the call to service for the cost of living crisis or surviving. What we need from Camden is for them to take a hold of the Time to Spare website and make that website up to date. You are commissioning a wonderful service there, but it isn't working. I will get often emails saying, there's this person who could volunteer for you, but that record is out of date. And sometimes that person's already with me, or they've even already left my service. But also the time to spare website could be used more effectively. Camden could advertise the time to spare website in the Camden New Journal, for example, on its platforms. You could help the volunteer sector by promoting this more widely in Camden for those who can, to support those who can't. Vaccinations, I'll touch upon as well. There is currently an email going around for the volunteer community sector partners about sign up, you know, you can get some funds to help push people for vaccinations, but where's the plan around vaccinations? Where's the information at the moment? I, for example, have emailed Camden 2 times now about getting vaccinations for our staff and volunteers, because we are considered frontline services, adult social care services. My emails go unanswered. I've asked a counsellor outside of my area to pick this up. Again, they haven't heard back. So you're asking the volunteer community sector partners to help you push vaccinations forward, but you're not giving support to the actual VCS partners. Also, we're very concerned, I'm concerned about how am I going to protect my staff in the months to come. We are seeing at the doors more safeguarding problems, issues, and I do not have resources when it comes to supermarkets have security guards at the front. What can I do for my staff? I can train them. I can make sure they've got the next, you know, they've got the training on adult safeguarding, but we have concerns about security because we are the ones seeing the impact firsthand. People are coming to the door and they are being more, it's safety, it's often mental health, but how it translates can be aggression towards your staff and your volunteers. And I don't know what the answer is to that one, but I'm saying in the next few months, we're all going to see a lot more of this on our doorsteps. Now, outside our centre, we have a surplus food cart where we put extra items for people who aren't subscribed to the service. And you cannot put out items on that cart fast enough, then it goes. So I want to echo what Tricia said earlier. We are seeing more people sign up for the service than before, and we have a limited capacity. We have some changes coming in January to meet that capacity, but there are people who it is the first time and it takes a longer to settle them into the service. I am proud of our centre that it is intergenerational, and by the 4th time they've been to the centre, the children feel at home. They don't feel they're in a food bank. So that is something that really I credit my volunteers for creating that atmosphere. We also operate a room of things in the centre. In there we have donated items, clothing items, and household, and corporate send it to us. People in the area declutter through us. This room wasn't used as much. We are now seeing so many more people taking items from that room. It really does highlight the need. Yes, it's fantastic for waste prevention, but it really does highlight the need that people are going through at the moment. Those are the things that I want to highlight. We need better support from Camden. Yes, you have these various teams in place, but they are not communicating with us. And this is something that I'm sure that if you speak to us individually, we'll confirm this. There are problems trying to communicate with Camden. We are aware there's limited resources, but we need, I think the quick wins, we can achieve those quick wins together if we can get staff members on the same way of thinking as we are. So I'll stop it there, Keith, because I don't want to run over, and there are so many organizations here that have so much more to add.
Thank you so much, Farrah. We did want to ensure that we had an opportunity for people to raise some of the concerns and some of the maybe shortcomings of the provisions so far, and you didn't disappoint there, so thank you very much, as usual. No, but it's really, I think it's vitally important that those points were shared, and I'm really pleased that we've got officers in this online room that we're able to hear that. And I know that John's raised his hand, so probably wants to respond. Yeah, just before you do, John, I just want to say that we will have an opportunity at the end, hopefully, to be able to go through some more questions, points if we don't get to you now. I'm just conscious of time, but yeah, please do respond, John.
As I said, there's a lot in there for me to respond to, and I mean, the first thing I'd really hope that we can achieve is sort of not a sort of council versus the sector narrative. I think there's a huge amount that we're pulling in the same direction on, and I think there's clearly on both sides of that equation, there's things that we may want to look at and improve. I think many of you were at the event last week where details around the kind of level of funding per Camden resident were shared. I think it was reduced by about a quarter to a third, I think over £1,200 down to about £300, £300 or so per resident in central government grants. So I think quite a lot of the stuff that's been shared around the challenges facing the sector, the council is similarly in a scenario. So I think just want to put that in as context. And I think it is important that we're pulling in that direction. There's some specific points that Farrah, I think, probably best picked up outside the meeting around individual members of staff from the council. That's probably a good thing to speak for us to speak directly on, and I can raise those with line managers as needed. I think there is there's some stuff in there around the kind of warm spaces, and I just wanted to sort of just to pick that in particular, which is the warm welcome campaign, which is around, it is the emphasis on warm welcome, that's asking people to say, look, we've got a whole range of warm, open public buildings, from libraries, children's centres, community centres, etc., that we that are places where people can go to work, relax, meet up with others in a safe, warm, welcome space. There's certainly not an emphasis on creating warm banks at all, quite the opposite. I think there's probably stuff that I'll get onto when I've got this window later on around the funding and the support that's available to the sector. But yeah, really happy to pick up the points around the individual service responses that you've raised concerns of outside of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks very much for that. Highgate Black Women Wellness. Excuse me, Highgate Black Women Wellness. You've got your hands raised. Can't see your face.
Hi, hello. I'm Zia.
Hello.
I just wanted to say we've had a very successful supper club. I mentioned it in the chat at a local restaurant for Black women. It was an African restaurant. And it was really successful because we advertised it as, a trip, to try new cuisine, but it's also a way of helping our members, the cost of living, as well as it being a warm bank and providing quizzes. And when you target certain communities, it has to be in a way to make them come without feeling embarrassed. Instead of, I think food banks are great, but they can be very intimidating places for people of color, Black women, to go to. As there's so much stigma, with getting free food. So I just think it would be nice if the council, would provide individual support for organizations like ourselves so that we can help our members, so they can engage with us and benefit from using food access to food, supper clubs and food banks through us, rather than everybody put in one building, different needs, different concerns, and saying, here you go, access it, it's there, because they're not going to use it. They're not, even if they are suffering, they're not going to use it. That's coming from my experience. And would it be okay if you could provide funding for certain groups, because we speak to them, we know them, and we know what they would like. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to say.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I think it's really important, that cultural context, actually. And yeah, as John said, and I emphasize, this is this is a partnership. This is us working together rather than us and them. So I'm sure we'll pick that up at some point. But yeah, thank you so much for that. So I'm going to move quite swiftly on to Sarah. There were some points actually that Farrah mentioned about the funding for residents, or the support for residents, and I know that Sarah can pick that up. So Sarah, you're okay for me to hand over to you now?
Yep, definitely. Let me just try and present my PowerPoint presentation. Here we go. Right, let me just go into presentation mode. Is that showing?
Perfect, thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm Sarah Sedley. I'm the Tackling Poverty Programme Manager, and my team looks after the cost of living crisis fund and the household support fund in Camden. And we also have a team of in customer service, that's the welfare support line. It used to be the coronavirus support line, and we transformed it to welfare support last summer when we realised a lot of the needs would be ongoing. And face-to-face. So we've got a range of we offer a range of wraparound support for residents. So I'm just going to give you some local context for the cost of living crisis, which I'm sure you're aware of, but some data. So we know that people are disproportionately affected by poverty. That women, Black, Asian and other ethnic groups, single mothers, large families, people in insecure work like 0 hours contracts, and those with no recourse to public funds are being impacted the most. Something like 75% of our applications for the Crisis Award come from women. We've got over 4,000 households in negative budgets and nearly 10,000 in fuel poverty, and that's even after the energy price cap and all of the government support that's gone out. There are about 2,500 children in the borough who are living at risk or already in financial crisis. Public Health identified specific cohorts, particularly children who have respiratory conditions, and that we know that being cold are going to make these conditions a lot worse. And in a recent survey of 1,300 Camden school children, 24% of them were worried about money. So we've got the cost of living crisis fund, which is the main thing of what my team do. We administer this fund. It's a £2 million fund to support people in financial hardship. The sort of rules around it are you can have up to 2 awards in a year. So families will tend to get 4 to 500. Sorry, looking like a pro. So single people and couples get about 300, and it goes up to 500 depending on your household size and the situation that you're in. The scheme is really flexible, so we can put money into people's bank accounts. We can give vouchers for clothes, for electrical items, for Argos, for warm bedding, or we can give a variety of those things to one person. So if somebody, for example, was overdrawn on their account, they might not want a payment into their bank account. They might prefer vouchers for Argos and for some supermarkets, and maybe an emergency payment as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in how we can deliver it. We've been working very much with, so my customer service team can refer people to the advice network for financial advice and support, but we also refer to a lot of our own staff in Camden. So what we've tried to do is to build up our trusted partner base so that we've got as many people as possible who are in direct contact with residents who know their situation and are a lot closer to them, to be able to make applications for awards for people. So at the moment we've got over 200 Camden staff, and that includes all of the neighbourhood housing officers, it includes adult social care, early years, children's social care, early help, and we've got our advice network set up, and we are sort of expanding to other organisations outside of Camden as well, charities that aren't part of the advice network but do a lot of work for residents in Camden. So if this is something you think you're interested in finding out more about or doing, then do get in touch with me afterwards and we can have a chat. I can go through it in a bit more detail with you. So it's a really quick application to do. It's like a 5-minute form to do, which I like I said, if I meet with you afterwards, I'm happy to demo it so you can see how easy it is. And yeah, and then it's processed by my team at the other end. We're getting a lot of applications, so with about 50 a day we're getting, so there's quite a backlog, but we're moving as much resource as we can onto that to deal with it so that they're processed as quickly as possible. So this is the publicity that what we've achieved so far. So we've got a cost of living hub on the website, so everything's in one place and easy to find. We've been promoting support on a range of issues, so that might be around food, energy bills, mental health, debt, finding a job, for all the various teams, and we're trying to keep each other in the picture as much as possible and link into each other, so we're all referring. We've shared information about the cost of living fund with our tenants via the housing news. We've done a bus stop advert campaign. We're promoting warm welcome spaces, which we've already talked about or heard about a bit. And we're developing a package to help them be promoted more locally. We've got advertising publicity in the Camden New Journal and in our Camden magazine that goes out to all residents in the first half of December. So here's just some stats on the fund so far. So you can see that since the fund launched, it launched on the 13th of September. Oh, done it again. Sorry. It launched on the 13th of September, and we've had 1,600 applications since then. We've processed 1,300 of them, and 1,165 have been approved and 157 have been rejected. The total amount that's been requested from us is 665,000. So you can see we've still got some money left in the budget to take us up to the end of March, so we're keen to get that out to as many people who need it as possible. This is some data from last week. I do a weekly dashboard, and you can see that from the household types. So one of the things we have to report onto DWP is the need for the award based on whether they have children living with dependent children, pensioners, somebody with a disability in the household. Unfortunately, you can't select all three of these, but we know that that could well be the case, or none of the above. The primary reason for people needing additional financial support is having children, dependent children in the household. And you can also see from the ethnicity that the majority, so about 2/3 of applicants are from not white background, so Asian, Black, Caribbean or mixed groups. Reasons for rejection, I won't go into that now, and I've also got some data on here about the type of housing that people live in. So you can see the majority is council housing. This is some data on wards, and I can send these slides out afterwards. You can have a look at this and see how your ward is doing, how many applications we've had and the expenditure for that ward. So what else is happening now? These other things that are happening in Camden aren't things that I know about in detail. They're not things I look after, but this is the other support that there is. So I've already mentioned the webpage with everything advertised there in one place. Obviously, we've got our advice network and our welfare support line, warm welcome spaces, food support, including donations and cooperatives. We've got Good Work Camden, which again I think has been mentioned, but they have been great in finding work for residents. We've got targeted and universal communications, and we've got schools. We're working with schools. We've presented to all of the heads and we've got schools on board. We've got Green Camden support, which is helping people to be more energy efficient, giving people advice, doing house visits to help make them more energy efficient. And we've got our household support fund, which mainly goes to, well, about half to 2/3 of that goes to families on either free school meals or housing benefits, and they get a food voucher 6 times a year to help them with the cost of food. And that we've got the Community Activism Summit, and we make Camden kits, and we are extending breakfast clubs in schools. So that's the end of my presentation. I have whizzed through it, but does anybody have any questions?
There was one in the chat from Tosley.
Okay.
It said, question, yeah, do you accept self-referrals? I don't know, Tosin, if you wanted to elaborate on that question.
Yeah, it was just to know, because you said about the partners. I just wondered if people can refer themselves directly.
So the way we've been doing it, because we've had that in my team at work, we've had that from partners doing the referrals, we ask for them to go to another organisation to do their application, but you can absolutely do it for any staff living in Camden, but it just needs to go through a different organisation. That's how we're operating that, and we are getting quite a few of those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Question from Trisha. You can just say, Trisha, if you want to speak.
I'm just going to say, the applications for the money, are they means tested?
No, they are. So when the way we assess them, so they are assessed. If someone's on benefits, we're very confident that they don't have enough money to make ends meet. If they're not on benefits, then we do want to see some sort of evidence that they're in hardship, or we want our partner to have seen some sort of evidence that they're in hardship. So like showing you an energy bill with a debt on it, the bank statement with nothing in it or overdrawn, that's what we ask you to do, just to make sure that they are in hardship, because we want to make sure that the money is reaching the right people.
Yeah, it's just, I'm just saying this as an organisation, you know, the time that it takes to fill these forms in and making sure they've got all the right paperwork and everything else. We just don't have capacity for somebody to do that here, unfortunately.
That's so fine.
It's just making sure that there's a referral pathway that we can actually make sure that there's somewhere that we're sending these people and they've got the right paperwork, that's all.
Yeah, absolutely. The format actually is very quick. However, I do understand that your capacity is probably non-existent, so doing something on top of what you're doing is just not feasible. But you can refer people to the advice network or to their NHO, or if they're under a service in Camden, the person in Camden can do a referral for them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Thanks, Sarah. I think that's really important, that particularly the points that you highlighted about the specific demographics where there is higher demand, and also the areas as well, the wards. I think that's really important for people to see where you're seeing the highest number of the highest number of applications. And then also, I think, you know, the slide, I know you didn't dwell on it too much, but the slide around the success rate of applicants, I think that's really important as well, because it just emphasizes that those that are applying are definitely in So yeah, that's really important.
Yeah, and just to clarify, so the majority of our applications that are rejected are because they're a duplicate application done by either two people in the same organisation or two different organisations. So a lot of them are that, and a lot of them are rejected because they're not Camden residents. So I'd say a very high proportion of people are absolutely in need. It's more likely you will be accepted, and we trust that the people that our partners are working with know the residents and know their situation and have got more understanding of that, whereas when we have just a phone call with someone, we don't necessarily know all the things that are going on for them. So that's why we do that.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Really important.
Okay.
Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who's Hannah from LondonPlus, who's going to talk to us about the CVS cost of living task and finish group. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Keith. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that.
All good.
Please do shout if there's a problem. All right. Okay. Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be here and hear from what's going on in Camden. I'm from LondonPlus. We're a pan-London charity, and we support and promote the voluntary and community sector across London. So essentially, we do a similar-ish job to Voluntary Acting Camden, but on a London-wide level. And the way that we support the sector is through data and insights, communications, our connections with the sector and with London-wide bodies like the Greater London Authority, the GLA, London councils and London funders and others, and also through our networks. And networks are a key part of what we do. So we host and support a network of CVSs across London, a network of volunteer centres, and also a social prescribing network for people working in social prescribing or interested in social prescribing. Now, the reason I've sort of come to talk to you today is the cost of living CVS task group that came up as a result of the CVS network, essentially, and some conversations that happened with a number of CVSs in London, the GLA and LondonPlus and the VCS Emergencies Partnership, because we know, obviously, like we've heard this morning, the cost of living, the impacts are so broad and so acute for so many people that we really felt that we needed to think about doing something collectively. So the aim and the purpose of this task group was to get the CVSs together, or get a subgroup of CVSs together, to really talk about actions that we could take, not just the challenges, but particular actions and ideas, share information, and just working on the principle that we're stronger together and more resilient together. We thought that it would be good to explore collective actions and collective messaging. So in terms of messaging, one of the things I think has already come up this morning is about awareness of support that's out there. And it was reported in the news that people on prepay meters specifically weren't claiming their vouchers for the energy discount from the government. So we decided that that was something that we could really help with, getting messaging out there that's really clear to all of our partners, all of our networks, and explaining how people could access and apply those vouchers. Another main reason for the group coming together is that we can escalate, using the connections that we've got across London, any challenges and ideas. So an example of that is we've invited London funders to come to our next meeting to talk to the group about models that their members are using for funding the response to this crisis, and sort of similar approaches that they might have adopted during COVID, and how they can apply that sort of learning to this crisis. And the other key feature of this task group is to share pockets of information, good practice and ideas that are happening in areas of London. That might be sort of borough-wide projects or really small-scale projects, but actually a great idea that other people can learn from and potentially replicate in their own area. So on that sort of sharing of information and good practice, we've sort of compiled some examples of good practice, partnership, innovative solutions from across London and beyond, and we've put them into one sort of example bank. That's still a bit of a work in progress at the moment, but we've got that on our website, and we're sharing that with our networks so that people can contribute the ideas that they're involved in or they're seeing in their local areas, or they could perhaps use ideas or tweak them or whatever to replicate them in their own areas, or go to their local council and with that, you know, suggestion. So there's a lot of similar stuff going on across London. We've talked about warm welcome spaces, and there's also community hubs and pop-up events and advice places where it's a one-stop shop for advice, with a warm welcome, with activities for children, potentially with hot food and drinks, stuff like that. But it's potentially a useful resource that we're still building upon. I'll also pop some links in the chat after I've shared the screen. Also, LondonPlus has put together a pan-London resource of support and resources available during the cost of living crisis. So we've got borough-based information broken down by borough, and we've also got pan-London information broken down by theme. And again, I'll pop that link in the chat after this. Both of them you can get from the LondonPlus cost of living webpage. And that's it. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I think it's really, I really wanted you to join us, because as well as looking at it from a borough-wide perspective, I think it's really important that we see that there is a collection of ideas, resources and challenges that's being shared and is available in one space, and that people can have a look at and see examples of things that's happened in other boroughs that they could maybe replicate in their own. And also I think it's important that our members know that we are also connected into this conversation, this wider conversation that can be shared with GLA and others. So VAC is part of the task and finish group, and will continue to represent the views and the comments and things like what we heard today. We'll be sharing with that group. But yeah, are there any questions or comments? Please do just speak.
I'll just ask, sorry, I just seem to be the one that's asking all the questions. With the London funders, we've had recently through a couple of our funders, they've actually decided to give us extra money to help with the cost of living crisis for us. I mean, there are, it depends on which funder and how much the amounts are. But if you're having a meeting with them, are you going to be doing a collective? So they did do a collective fund during the pandemic. Do you think that that's something that will be raised at that meeting?
I think it's very likely. I think the idea is that we invite them to the group, hear from them, but also they can hear from the group around what's needed. And that's based on the CVS's gaining their insights from the sector, like Keith and his colleagues have done here. So it's very much looking at what the approaches are at the moment and how our group can feed in our insights to really get the help where it's needed.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thanks again, Hannah. Thanks very much for joining us. Okay, I'm gonna move on now to John from Camden Council, who's going to share with us the community response in council and yeah, any other things that we need to be aware of that the council's doing in this space. So over to you, John. And then after John's spoken, we'll have a chance to ask some questions. So thank you very much, John.
Brilliant, thanks, Keith. And you've managed to bring us back right on time with the chairing. Great job. Just to start off with a kind of huge thank you and appreciation to VAC for the like, it feels like a really timely piece of work. I know you've been working at pace to get those insights from the survey, pull those together, and a really valuable forum. So huge appreciation for that. And I think really just to emphasise that there is a kind of an absolute recognition of the challenges that the cost of living crisis presents to the VCS. And I think it was, it was summed up in that kind of dual piece, so both in terms of the residents you're working with, the demand that you're seeing, and the impacts on organisation from staff, volunteers, finances, your buildings, premises, the whole piece. It really is I think I've been working in this space for about 10 years or so with kind of bridge between the council and the voluntary sector, and this is the most challenging period of time. We thought COVID was tough, but there was a kind of mobilisation from a stronger starting position. This on the back of it, we really do recognise that challenge. I think Alex, that presentation, I think we'll be linking up hopefully afterwards. Really good to get a copy of that. I think a huge amount in there, and there's lots of insights there that we would want to use to land this year's Resilience Fund. And I think for those of you who were able to join, there was a cost of living community response meeting convened by the council back in middle of October, and there was a commitment there. Keith and I have been working very closely to say that we will use the insights from that survey to inform the future design of the design of this year's Resilience Fund. So obviously lots there alongside the insights that we've had from the annual monitoring or the annual review conversations we've had with the sector. Since that community meeting in October, there's been a lot of work at play to try and sort of think how do we best mobilise support for voluntary community sector organisations working to respond to the cost of living. So I'm going to talk through some of the funding programmes that are in place. I hadn't planned to cover it, but I'm happy also to talk about the warm welcome campaign as well, if useful. I've talked about it in a few different arenas, but happy to talk about that later if needed. Just pull me up, Keith, if that's something you want to cover. And I suppose I'll sort of start off with, I think in the midst of what I've described as just being the most challenging period of time I've seen in a kind of decade working in that bridge between the council and the voluntary sector, I think we are in a good a position as it's possible to be in the context of Camden. I bumped into some former colleagues yesterday, and context in neighbouring boroughs is there isn't the resource and real challenges. So I think hopefully what I'm outlining today will give you a kind of degree of hope in what is a very challenging context. So I'm going to talk through, I'll bring up some slides just to talk through a few programmes that we've been working on. They are all either about to hit the public domain or we've started already. So can you see that? That'll come up okay? Brilliant, thanks, Keith. So there's 4 programmes I want to talk about: a cost of living community response fund at the kind of ward level, cost of living generalist advice funds, COVID-19 food insecurity funding, and then the VCS the Resilience Fund. So we've been working very closely with the council's participation team, and also a group of services that were involved in mobilising the Warm Welcome campaign. One of the things we've been really struck by is the need to take a very kind of local action. So looking at a ward level, saying, right, what are the assets? We've got a community centre, maybe a local library that might be voluntary sector run, a children's centre, a food project in that area, range of voluntary sector organisations. Yeah, how can we move at pace to develop a local response that sees that collaboration between organisations in the area, sharing resources and bringing together partners to respond directly. The sort of 3 key areas around this kind of supporting for community action, and that could be about addressing gaps that have been identified in an area, or enhancing existing activities. So things like extending a food project into a community meal, extending the opening hours for provisions so that it coincides with school closing, for example, or maybe into an evening, looking at reuse and recycling initiatives, kind of small grassroots community action that can support residents with cost of living. bit of been asked around there around the kind of coordination and collaboration between partners in an area and communicating what's available to residents and organisations working in that patch that makes sense to residents. So we've managed to secure £300,000 worth of SIL funding. So top slicing this, which breaks down to 15k per ward. It does say it's not a huge, it doesn't, you see it here at that level, it's not a huge amount of funding, but actually really can kind of, it's over a 3-month period. So for this winter period, basically enabling organisations who are delivering things like the food project, hosting the advice session, doing the community meals, etc., just to kind of enhance or address gaps in the existing work. We heard really loud and clear that speed was of critical importance in this, and so jointly with the participation team, we're convening ward level meetings. There was the first one held last week in Holborn, there was one in Kilburn yesterday, one in Gospel Oak last night, and there's others being scheduled. They're being led by ward councillors and the participation team, supported by the community partnerships team. And in that space, it's really about partners coming together to develop a local action plan that says, this is what we've got, this is what we need to do, and these are some of the resources that we need to make it happen. I think this might be a record. We got a meeting I think it was last Wednesday or Thursday evening in Holborn. We made a decision yesterday for the funding, and we expect to be able to raise the purchase order by the end of the week that would get the funding out. So I know it's not a huge amount of funding in that space, but I suppose that we can have a speed of response if we can get the collaboration at a ward level that comes up with a clear plan that's people are all still able to work effectively together, small amounts of grassroots funding, and get that plan endorsed by all it needs is 2 endorsements by the ward councillor, so 2 endorsements of ward councillors in each ward, and then that comes through for decision. So that's the first strand of this, and it is, I suppose the good news is this is new money. It's new money at pace and focus on that kind of community level response that can support residents. Alongside this, we've been doing a lot of work with the Camden Advice Network, and we're particularly interested, sort of combination of the annual review insights, conversations with sectors, conversations with Camden Advice Network. There's real pressure for real capacity challenges for the advice network, and observations of kind of real gap. Farrah, I think this speaks to your point between front level community services, e.g. a food bank, and access to generalist advice funds that's very much based on a kind of referral approach. We know that people drop off if there's kind of long, complex referral routes. So the idea here is that we're looking to increase the capacity of generalist advice delivered through community outreach locations. So an additional 200k of funding for generalist advice provision into the advice network, absolutely focused on outreach workers, so organisations that can mobilise that additional capacity relatively quickly and see a link between the food projects or the community centre provision and that generalist advice worker who can do debt, welfare benefit and housing advice, and potentially that bit of support around the grants that Sarah talked us through. So I think we're seeking expressions of interest at the moment from members of the Camden Advice Network to bolster that capacity and make that link. Third strand I wanted to talk to, and this is something that Philip Vaughan and his team have been leading on. It's a bit of a bridge here. There was some funding that was available. It's come through, I think it's from the Department of Health. It does have a COVID-19 focus, which is hence it's COVID-19 rather than cost of living. That's the nature of the funding that's provided, but the intentions are for funding applications of up to 7.5k per food organisation, a total pot of 150k funding that's available for members of the food food alliance, I think is the right term in Camden, or the members of the Camden Food Network, and Philip will be leading the administration of that, but applications out, and it really is about that kind of winter crisis response, keeping that sort of food bank provision and the food project provision running for this period. So those are the 3 what I would describe more as kind of community response or slight crisis pieces of work that are around that local offer, and should have said it certainly on the first one, the ward meetings that could include, you know, for example, bit of furniture provision, setting up a reception area, setting up a meeting area for a warm as part of the warm welcome campaign. It's that kind of grassroots activity. And then the fourth one that we've got, that this meeting I think is really key for us, is around the community impacts and resilience fund. We undertook over the last few months, we've been out meeting with all organisations that receive core grant funding. Very kind of similar messages coming through from the survey around that financial stability and sustainability, premises costs, the challenges around business planning. So people being in that absolutely in the crisis mode for several years, being that there's been a deprioritisation of but it's just not bandwidth to look at kind of business planning and organisational change, challenges around the recruitment and retention of staff. And another thing that's come through is around the kind of historical liabilities, whether that's around pension funds or sometimes rent arrears. And we think that there's quite an existential challenge there for the sector, that if those sets were to materialise, it sort of hangs over organisations in terms of ongoing viability. So I suppose this is the bit that I think we're in a very strong position. So all of the money that all the funding that I've just outlined is in effect new funding coming out into the sector. I think people will be aware that there was a 2-year funding programme, the Resilience Fund, launched last year. So we've got a funding programme for this year. It's £1 million available within the budget for it. I do want to take a moment just to talk about the sources of funding for that, because I think it's really important that we've got a shared understanding of it. So there's an annual budget that the Community Partnerships team holds of 540,000, and each year, unless there's a savings taken, that 540,000 is available each year. The reason we've been able to make this $1 million this year, and I think it was 800,000 or 900,000 last year, is because there's been underspends held in reserves, and we've, as partly as the impact of COVID, and now obviously the impact of the cost of living, we're drawing down on those reserves. So it's a finite source of funding. It means sort of next year we wouldn't be in a scenario where we've got that $1 million. It's the 540,000 revenue budget, but we are in a good position this year of having $1 million. And I set that up in that way because I think the absolute, the key word that we will want to land in this resilience fund will be around sustainability. And I think, this isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily about doing, it was certainly not about doing more. It's certainly not about doing additional projects. It will be around that kind of organisational viability and sustainability. So addressing kind of fundamental risks that are affecting organisations, or prevented from surviving or thriving. I was trying to do the maths quickly on Alex, your presentation. I think it was about 42% off the top of my head of organisations said that they really are going to struggle, kind of on the edge, or are really kind of uncertain about their position. So I think there'll be a question mark as to where do we land the focus of the funding. So trying to get that to the places where there is viability, but there are risks, I think would be the starting point. And the idea is it will focus on things that are about, for example, increasing organisations' financial resilience, business planning. Could be around trustee development. It could be that bit of bandwidth that enables a kind of spend to save or spend to generate income. I'm going to bring this down and talk a little bit more to it, because absolutely kind of, I think the phrase was summed up in Alex, in your presentation, about supporting board and managerial responses that are affecting the viability of the sector. So I'm meeting with members of the team this week to finalise to develop and finalise the proposals. They'll be going to Councillor Shah next Tuesday. Keith, Alex, I think if we can really try and link up and get that presentation that you've shared, we'll look at the language in there, the insights that you've got from that to develop the programme. So I think there's it's we are, despite the challenges that we've heard today, I think we're in a relatively strong position to try and navigate through this coming kind of 12 to 18 months at least. So happy to how we'll organise. See, there's some questions in the side. How will organisations apply for the VCS Resilience Fund? So we will be looking, it will go out to, well, I should say there's a couple of other considerations we're giving. We heard at the meeting last week, there was questions raised about rent. There's questions raised of, yeah, I think we've been pushing and sharing information about the London funders' response around inflationary uplifts in grants. There's something quite neat administratively about that. But there are wider questions around kind of fairness to the sector for organisations that aren't tenants or aren't kind of multi-year grant recipients. So we're just grappling with those questions, but we did hear that, have heard those points raised. How will organisations apply? We're looking at a one-stage application form. We want that as quick as possible. Will need to be assessments, the sort of crisis. So yeah, it will be an application form that will be communicated out through our VCS news bulletin. Keith will look to link it with you for your newsletters. It will go information to everybody. We hold a sort of database of partners that we'll write to everybody on that. And the sort of, yeah, so the sort of things that we'll be looking at in terms of those assessments will be, we'll absolutely want to ensure that there is a sort of going concern and there's organisational viability. We want to look at the difference that this grant would make to your organisation. So there might be some organisations saying, actually, that's nice to have, but it's not critically important. And others saying, wow, this is the thing that's going to make the difference. So we'll have some criteria around that. We'll also look a bit around the sort of work that you're doing with others to make difficult changes. And I think I was struck a bit, it's this idea around that kind of really honest, frank assessment of the risks that are facing your organisation and an appetite to really take them on. I've been, from the annual review conversations I've had with organisations, been really impressed with some of the willingness for people to grapple with very, very difficult financial challenges. It's not a kind of, oh, we just need more money. It's like, actually, we're looking to change this bit of the way we're running and operating, whether that's looking at mergers, whether that's looking at shared space, whether that's looking at the types of pension scheme, all of that stuff. That's, to me, is a real signal of organisations kind of grappling with what is a real challenge, and that's where we'll look to try and get the focus to. So I'll stop there if that's okay, Keith. I'm happy to take questions or speak about the warm spaces if useful.
Thank you, John. And I'm going to open up the floor for questions in a minute. I just wanted to ask a question about timing. So one of my reflections of our survey results is that the financial crisis that some organisations are facing is not shared across the piece now. And I'm just wondering if the Resilience Fund, is there a flexibility, or is there flex in the way that it's structured so that some of it could be available now and some of it could be available, I don't know, in 6 months from that time, so that organisations have the space and time to reassess the position that they're in. So they imagine that, the challenges that they face now might either be intensified or exacerbated a bit further down the line. So I don't know if that's something that could be considered. There's kind of like a midpoint in which you ask the sector again the challenges that they're facing.
So if I've understood the question correctly, so we're working at pace to try and get this out as quickly as possible. So we've got a draft applications and guidance. It still needs at least this week's work on it, and possibly a little bit into next. The allocation of the funding sits at a strange time because it's sort of right at year end and it's run right into next financial year. So there's might be some funding that goes out this year and some that goes out next year. There's also decisions that trustees that you can make around. We wouldn't expect that, if it goes out this year, to be spent this year. It could be spent later. We are looking at a single process, i.e. it's not going to be a programme now and a programme in 6 months' time. There will be another programme, another kind of, we've still got that. We'll have next year's budget it will be less. It was 540,000, but there'll be another programme next year. There are also, I mean, I suppose there's a commitment here. There's also, if organisations are, if you're receiving core funding from the council, please do approach, if there's real immediate financial questions, that issues that are proposing you as you come to year end, please do reach out and have a conversation with us. Sometimes you're in a scenario where you've got a grant that runs multiple years, and there might be something there around cash flow that we could have a conversation on. So there's that. I don't think does that answer your question, Keith?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I don't know if I articulated it well enough, but yeah, it's just that I remember from the pandemic that especially when London funders had their emergency funding available, I remember one of the criticisms was that you had to get, sorry, one of the positives was that there were different periods in which the fund became available, recognizing that different organizations face different challenges at different periods. And so some organizations might be using their reserves and they're quite comfortable to do that now and don't need the funding now, but they might do in 6 months' time or in 8 months' time. And so making sure that that's available at the point in which they need it. So yeah, it was just...
So just that reserves point is a really interesting one. Certainly people want to look at reserves and look at reserve, the sort of stipulation within your reserve policies. If you've got a huge amount more in your reserves, then that's clearly, and the opposite being true, but please don't. Yeah, so we'd look at reserves.
Yeah, thank you. I know that Farrah has her hand up. Do you want to go ahead, Farrah? And then please do put your hand up. I can see more people now, so you can put your hand up. I'll come to you.
John, thank you for all that information. I think it's, again, really great that you're here. This isn't information that has been communicated to us. I don't know why we're being missed out on the, I do occasionally get the Camden community newsletters, but for example, we haven't received any information to find out how to be included in the ward level meetings. So that's my first question. I'd like to know how to be included. The generalist fund you speak of, that could potentially help us with getting an advisor in place. When I talked about needing to find 24,000 to have an advisor in house, we've applied for 10,000 somewhere else. We're short. So again, this could be good for us. So I'd like to know how to apply. And my third question is, obviously Camden has so many wonderful non-core strategic partners, VCS partners in Camden that are not strategic partners. Many of us who are grassroots and reaching hard to reach communities, the work we do, we know, is recognized and is vital. What support is there for us?
So I think that's 3 questions if I've caught them. So the first one, this is the first time this information has been shared. We've been working on it in line for this meeting, so it will be, once we've got this approved and discussed at cabinet with cabinet member, this will go out on, the information around this will go out on our news bulletin. So that's why you haven't heard it yet. It is sort of live. The second point around the ward level meeting, what we've done is a mapping of voluntary sector organisations by ward. So Somers Town meeting I don't think has taken place yet. I will double check to see whether you've been added into that list, and then there's a meeting with ward councillors to look at have we got all the partners there. So we'll ensure that you're on that list for Somers Town. The advice fund, the decision that we've taken on that is about extending the capacity of the Camden Advice Network members that are with accredited advisors and the systems in place to manage outreach. So it would be more around hosting advice, for example, through the food bank and a project. I think those are the 3 questions. And yeah. And then the smaller grassroots. So the resilience fund will be open. I think there is you know, I think it speaks quite a bit to the question that Tricia, you've put in the sidebar of £1 million spread across many organisations might not be much. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a really unpalatable decision that has to be made here about where do we position this funding. Do you spread the jam quite thinly? And I think my assessment is if we spread this too thinly, it won't achieve what is needed to achieve what we need to achieve. And that's a really difficult message. So there's a tension there, Farrah. And I don't think anybody's got the right answer. There's not a right answer. There are a series of different consequences if we don't get funding to organisations that that perhaps need, you know, at higher levels, that perhaps need 25, 30,000. There's a risk that we lose decades and decades of development of a voluntary sector. It's decades worth of investment that the council's made and decades worth of history and graft and sweat from trustees and staff in the sector. If we don't spread it widely enough, we'll lose that creativity and innovation that comes through from grassroots organisations. So I think there's a point that we need to take that starts sort of in terms of direction of travel, which is around there's a gap in the grant funding that's in place for the sector. So we've got large core grants, we've got micro grants with the We Make Camden kit, and there's a gap in the middle for small and medium organisations. And I think we'll be looking at some proposals for the future of the resilience fund, that 540,000 I mentioned, that says, actually, do we need to get a small grants programme for small to medium organisations? Because I think there's a gap in the landscape there.
There's a number of comments in the chat, John, about wanting to be involved in those ward level meetings. So that's something for you to take away, how the sector can get involved in those.
I will. What's the best way to do that, Keith? If I put maybe an email address to you to send that to you, is that okay?
Send it to us and then we
meeting?
can send it. We can send it out. There's a question from Henna, Asian Women. Would you mind unmuting yourself and asking the question?
Hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank VAC for inviting us on this forum today. And it was lovely to listen to, some of you, so much information which you have shared. And we also share the same concerns about cost of living and how it's impacting our service users and our services that we're also providing. And like just recently, we took our members out on lunch as well, just to cheer them up and provide them with a hot meal. And that made a huge difference, to be in that moment. It helped them with their mental health and well-being and providing them with a social platform. At the same time, our budget is also stretched. Our volunteer numbers are low. We're trying to work hard to meet the demands of our services. So we're interested in the Resilience Fund as well. And if John can share a link, for us to initiate the application. And if other organizations would also love to come and work in partnership with us to share our projects, that would be wonderful. We don't only work with Asian women, but with the BAME community. So any help and support that's out there for us, please come and reach out to us as well.
Thank you very much. And we'll make sure that we'll share the details of people that are attending this meeting. As long as we've got consent, I'll check with Ricky. We've got consent to do that, but we'll want to facilitate that collaboration. John,
so the question is, can we share the funding link, the link to the funding application? Keith, your point of hot off the press, this is what VAC does. Like I've got a third written, about half written, third to finish guidance notes for funding application that we've got to take to councillors throughout next week. We're aiming for next week. It may be the week after, but trying to get that out. And Keith, we'll share that with you. It will go out on your bulletin. It will go out on our newsletter. So, please do share with people on this call.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions or comments? especially those that haven't spoken yet. Please don't be shy.
I'd just like to jump in and say, John, if we can get an advisor on site through Camden, fantastic. I mean, that's why we looked at CAB, so that the person would be accredited. Also, their costings covered all the core costs for them, the management, etc. So I'd love to discuss that with you.
Yeah, so we should be in a position where we've got answers around where the funding is going, and there'll be a tricky matching piece that will say, okay, we've got, for example, Citizens Advice could mobilise, or Perry Ward, etc., etc. How do we then match that to the right community provision? I think ward level conversations could be key on that. Come through to myself and Sassika. We will be trying to match the increased capacity with community projects based across the borough.
Okay, I can't see any more hands or any comments in the chat. If I've missed you in the chat, please do say. So I think it's clear to say that we've had it's been really important discussion about this really difficult topic, and I thank all of the speakers for joining us and sharing their insights, and thank you all for joining us today, and again for sharing your insights and contributions. As John said, one of the things that I really enjoyed hearing from John is the fact that there is things happening, and there is a recognition of the challenge, but there is also a recognition of the ingenuity in the borough, and that we're working together to try and mitigate the impact of this. And I mentioned that in my intro, that as well as mitigating the impact, I think it's important as well that as a sector we demonstrate on how important we are. And as I said, if you're interested in hearing more about the actions that VAC would like to take alongside the council and on that point, then please do let us know. We're really keen to lobby as much as we can and campaign to protect the sector, because we know that when things get tough, it is often this sector that is hit first and hardest. So we want to resist that as much as we can. So without further ado, I want to say again, thank you very much for everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next forum. Will be this meeting was recorded, and we'll be putting it on our website so you can watch it again, and we will also put a summary of it in our newsletter this week, especially for those that couldn't make it. So thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.